Democrats and Republicans agreeing on something in Congress, and it relates to policing? I couldn't believe it when I first heard about it. A new bill introduced in the House of Representatives would triple grant funding for local police agencies over the next 10 years. It's true, so I wanted to cover it. The bill is sponsored by Representatives Abigail Spanberger, Democrat of Virginia, and Tom Rice, Republican of South Carolina. If passed, it would reauthorize, make permanent, and increase funding for the Justice Department's Office of Community-Oriented Policing Services, or COPS as it's known. It seeks to recruit and keep officers who live in the area that they police. It's also designed to expand access to grant money to rural departments and those in low-income communities so they can recruit and hire more officers, pay them more, and hang on to the cops that they train. Of course, it all comes amid a national surge in crime, a widespread shortage of officers, and just a few years after some on the far left called for defunding the police. In a statement, the National Fraternal Order of Police says, quote, "Our nation is grappling with an increase in crime, particularly violent crime, and the profession of law enforcement is struggling to hire and retain good officers to keep our communities safe. This legislation affirms our national commitment to the community-oriented policing strategy, which the Fraternal Order of Police believes is the most effective way to promote public safety and to enhance the quality of life in a community." Joining me now from her home in Virginia, Representative Abigail Spanberger, a former law enforcement officer herself. Thank you so much for coming on the show. We really appreciate it. Are you expecting any opposition to this?
I hope not. Yeah, this is such a straightforward yet important bill that's really responsive to the needs of the communities like those that I represent, and certainly that my colleague Tom Rice from South Carolina that he represents. This bill was born of the stories that we heard from sheriff's departments and from police departments, the police chiefs and sheriffs who have just faced really significant challenges since the beginning of the pandemic.
Some are going to say that they would expect that someone your side of the aisle would object to increased funding in this way for police. Is that true?
That's not true. That's never been true. As you mentioned, I'm a former federal law enforcement officer. I'm the daughter of a retired federal law enforcement officer. And really what I want to see, and certainly what I think we can all gather around, is investment in training, in recruitment, in vetting, and in ensuring that police departments, when they go through the process of recruiting officers within the community, training them to be a part of an effort to bring community policing to the streets of their towns, cities, or localities, that those officers can then stay there. But certainly I have heard from sheriffs, particularly across the rural communities that I represent, two challenges. One is that they are losing officers. They're losing officers to lateral transfers to larger departments that can pay them more. And they have been so overstressed during the pandemic because across rural communities in particular, they are responding to mental health crises, overdoses, and there are just not enough officers in a department to be able to share that burden. And so to be responsive to that need, it does come down to an issue of funding. It comes down to the issue of funding the police so that they can bring their best selves. They can ensure they have the full complement of officers necessary to really serve the communities, ideally, in which they live and the communities that they serve. So that's why this bill, not only does it nearly triple the funding to the COPS program, it reauthorizes it for 10 years into the future. It also cuts through some of the restrictions that make it harder for smaller localities and rural localities to qualify for these federal grant dollars. So it makes them more competitive, and it adds more dollars to the overall pot to ensure that communities across the country that want to invest in quality policing, training, vetting, mental health services, that they are able to do so with the support of this COPS grant, which is exactly its purpose.
I have spent a lot of time with rural sheriff's departments or rural police departments, and what you're saying is certainly preaching to the choir in terms of them needing the resources to be able to retain talent, to be able to train, et cetera. I was just so pleased to hear that there is this bipartisan effort out there on something that seems to make so much sense. Do you have any idea sort of how the Senate is viewing it at this point?
So we have Senate co-sponsors. So we're looking forward to it moving ideally in both houses and moving forward. We're excited about that prospect. We've got 12 co-sponsors in the House so far, and we're continuing to build support and momentum for the legislation. And, you know, Tom Rice of South Carolina and I are both a member of a bipartisan group called the Problem Solvers Caucus, that we get together with people of the other party frequently to talk about some of the challenges our communities are facing. And, you know, that's what really started this initiative for us, the challenges that our local departments are facing, because it impacts not just, of course, the departments and their officers, but it impacts the larger community. If you call 911 because you need help, and there is not a police officer or a sheriff's deputy to respond quickly, that impacts the community. If you are in time of crisis or a loved one's in time of crisis, you want to know that the person who is showing up at your door to bring, you know, support and aid has been trained to deal with sometimes what are very complex situations. So this was a pretty straightforward bill from our perspective.
Sorry to interrupt you. I sort of mentioned this before, but I just want to confirm this. You think you're going to be able to get the left wing of the party on board with this bill?
I think I think that we will have the hefty mass of the Democratic Party and the hefty mass of the Republican Party supporting this bill. And frankly, that's what we need to get the bill across the finish line. You know, there may be people on either side of the aisle who object for whichever reason, but the kind of the center of gravity within the United States Congress, at least on this issue, at least to the support for the COPS program, we feel confident that when it eventually comes to the floor for a vote, that we'll securely secure that necessary vote for passage.
Well, it makes enormous sense to me. And as it continues, please keep us updated, because I will be very interested in watching and hoping that this bill moves forward in the same bipartisan fashion that it seems to have gone so far. Representative Spanberger, thank you so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, and thanks for highlighting this legislation.